So today we are going to be tier ranking the 2022 draft class for the Green Bay Packers. In the past couple of weeks, I've done rankings on the most recent 2024 draft class through OTAs, rookie minicamp, and minicamp. Then after that, I did one on the 2023 draft class. So in today's video, let's dive down into the 2022 draft class for the Green Bay Packers. As you get further and further away from a draft class, say that 2 to 3 year mark, you really start to get an idea of what these players are starting to become. For example, of this draft class, Zack Tom, year one, wasn't a full-time starter, played every position but center. Then we see in 2023, step up into a full-time role at right tackle and is becoming one of the better right tackles in the NFL and probably could play at an all-pro level pretty much anywhere on this offensive line. So once you get into like year 2, year 3 of a draft class, it's really easy to, I guess, reassess and regrade that draft class. So I'm excited to dive down into this 2022 class today. And again, it's another great draft class by Brian Gutekunst. When we looked at the 2023 one, I mean, there's a lot of quality players there, a lot of, starters or guys that are becoming potential starters. And the same goes for 2022. A lot of starters, a lot of depth pieces. In my opinion, Brian Gutekunst has really nailed the past 3 to 4 drafts. And it's why exactly the Packers are such an up-and-coming team and such a young roster, but not only young, but good. You don't see that often. Usually it's one or the other. If a team's very young, they're not going to be that great of a roster. It's kind of a rebuild. But with Brian Gutekunst and the team that he made through his drafting, I mean, they're a very young and talented roster and, a contender at this point. Quickly, before we dive down into this tier ranking, of course, I want to give a shout out to today's video sponsor and channel sponsor, Sleeper. Sleeper is offering new users a first-time deposit match up to $100 with my special code BASS, that's B-A-S. All of the information is down in the description below. I will also be personally paying for your first deposit up to $10. So if you want to take advantage of this, simply go sign up for Sleeper, make a first-time deposit with code BASS, send me a screenshot of that on Twitter, and I will personally Venmo you $10. Then Sleeper will double that, and you'll pretty much have a free $20 in your account, where then you can choose higher or lower on a specific player on any given stat among a multitude of different sports. Simply make your picks. It's really easy to do. It takes less than 30 seconds. And then you can potentially win up to 100x payouts. Remember to always gamble responsibly, guys. So again, guys, definitely go check out Sleeper. They're a sponsor of this channel. You can get a first-time deposit match up to $100 with code BASS, B-A-S, with the link down below. All right, so without further ado, let's bring up the screen and dive right down into this tier list here. So it's the same as the past 2 videos. We're going to be ranking these players by tiers. You have S tier, or the best tier, like elite, right? An elite draft pick. You have A, B, C, D, and F. I'm kind of keeping F for players that, aren't on the roster anymore, or, were for a little bit, but really did nothing on this roster. And there's really only one in this entire draft class. And that's Tariq Carpenter, which we'll dive into. We're probably going to start in the first round. Usually we start in the 7th round. I think we're going to start in the 1st round in this video. But just kind of wanted to explain these tiers for anyone new to these type of videos or didn't see the prior to. If you want to go check those out after this, you can find them on my channel. But we have Tariq Carpenter, Kingsley Enagbare, Romeo Doubs, Jonathan Ford, Zack Tom, Rasheed Walker, Quay Walker, Samori Toure, Christian Watson, Shawn Ryan, and Devontae Wyatt. It's a pretty loaded draft class, if I'm being honest, but they also had 2 first-round picks, and they did very, very well in the 4th to 5th rounds. So let's get this thing started, and we're going to start in the 1st round with Quay Walker. And, I'm kind of questioning where I should put him here. I don't think anyone would say he's an S tier at this point. I mean, he just hasn't been consistent enough to be considered S tier, but he's also been very solid at terms of linebacker since entering the league. I mean, we're talking 177 tackles, a very low missed tackle rate at 8.8%, including 84 stops. He's had an interception, 8 pass breakups, but if you look at his PFF grades, which this doesn't mean he's a bad player, it's not the end-all be-all. It's been a sub 60 PFF grade both seasons. So sub-average, so below average. The problem with Quay Walker has been inconsistency. You know, some games you're like, wow, this guy has it all. This guy can do it all. Sideline to sideline speed, coverage, everything. And then there's some games where he simply looks lost out there. But considering the stats that are at hand, that doesn't consider a subjective grade, I still think Quay Walker is an A-tier player. I think Quay Walker's, on the verge of becoming a top linebacker in the NFL, and I think he will be under this Jeff Hafley scheme. And I know I'm basically just grading this off of what we've seen so far, the 2 seasons. So I'm not going to put in too much of what I think they'll become in this ranking. If I were to do that, maybe he would be an S tier because I have high hopes for Quay Walker. But I definitely believe he's an A tier player. I mean, we're talking, like I said, 177 tackles in 2 seasons. Thrown into a Joe Barry defense, that's pretty impressive. Right? To succeed in a Joe Barry defense isn't something easy to do. And I think he's a very athletic linebacker. I think he's had some mental issues here and there, but I think he's definitely grown on those a ton as the years have gone by. So in my opinion, he's an A graded player. I was thinking about putting him B, but I simply can't do that with how many tackles he's made, how many stops he's made, the low tackle percentage. Let me know down in the comments below where you'd put Quay Walker. Next, we have Devonte Wyatt. And this one was a similar argument, but for Devonte Wyatt, I went and put him in the B tier list. He just hasn't really made that next jump yet, whereas Quay Walker has a ton of tackles and has something to show for the 2 seasons. Devonte Wyatt has some to show for. I mean, we're talking 56 pressures and 9 sacks over 2 seasons. That's not bad at all, but I still think that's a B tier player. I don't think that's A just yet. If it was, say, 14, 15 sacks and 75 plus pressures and a bunch of tackles and great PFF grades, and yeah, probably an A or S tier, but it simply hasn't been that. He's had 34 tackles, and this is where it made it a guarantee for me to put him in B tier, and definitely not A. A 25% missed tackle rate. He has not been good in terms of securing tackle. And because of that, he hasn't also graded well via PFF. He's had 31 stops, and also with Devonte Wyatt, similarly to Quay Walker, just inconsistent. You see some games where he's just wrecking that offensive line. He's in the backfield consistently. And then you see other games where he's missing tackles. He's not, filling run lanes correctly. I think this is also going to change under Jeff Hafley. I have high hopes for this new defense. But as of right now, based off of the 2 seasons, I think Devonte Wyatt is a B tier draft pick here. Then we have Christian Watson. And man, this one is so difficult for me because, if this guy can stay healthy, I think he can be an S tier player. But in terms of the injuries and the inconsistency, I think I have to put him at B with Wyatt. I really would love to put him at A with Quay Walker, but simply due to the inavailability of Christian Watson over the past 2 seasons has really, hurt his ranking here. Now, he's had 71 receptions for 1,053 yards over the 2 seasons, but, if you average that out, that's 500 yards a season for a second-round receiver. That's not that great. So, if he averaged, even with the injury, say 600-700 yards per year, I'd put him up at A. But just at 500 yards per year, he does have 12 touchdowns. He has scored a ton of touchdowns, so I give that to him there. He saw that specialist this offseason in Madison, hopefully to fix these lower leg issues. But as of right now, based off the last 2 seasons, I think I have to put him at B tier just due to all the injuries and not being available for a lot of games over the last 2 years. Next, we have Shawn Ryan. He was picked in the 3rd round. His first season, he didn't see a single snap on offense and also had a 6-game suspension for violating the league's substance abuse policy. But last season, we started to see more of Shawn Ryan. As in the second half of the season, they started to rotate in Shawn Ryan for Jon Runyan. So they'd kind of do like a 50-50 split, 60-40 split some games. They're just really trying to get more snaps for Shawn Ryan because they knew in 2024 he'd be competing for a starting right guard spot, which he is right now. But over last season, he didn't play well. I mean, there was some flashes of what he could become against the Rams. I thought he had a really good game and had some nice snaps against Aaron Donald. But outside of that, his PFF grade last year, a 49.3, a 50.8 run block, a 42.5 pass block, and allowed 8 pressures, but actually allowed 0 sacks. So I think those PFF grades are a little skewed a little bit. 8 pressures, 0 sacks, although he didn't play a full season. That's not bad at all. So for that case, I'm going to put him at C. Now, he didn't play in 2022. But he did play in 2023, and right now he has a chance to be a starting right guard for the Green Bay Packers. So I can't rate him lower than a C, simply because he's still on the roster and fighting for a starting spot right now. Will he win that right guard spot in 2024? Who knows? We got a lot of time left this offseason. Training camp's really going to be a big telltale sign of who, really starts to shape out this offensive line, and it could be Shawn Ryan. I liked the flashes I saw from him in 2023, and I think he can be a nice mauler guard option down low on that offensive line, and the Packers need more of those guys. So I'm giving a C grade or a C tier ranking for Shawn Ryan. Then in the fourth round, where the Packers just absolutely nailed the fourth round, as they typically always do. First, we had Romeo Doubs, and if I'm giving Christian Watson a B tier ranking, I got to give Romeo Doubs an A. I think he's a very underrated wide receiver in the NFL and through Packers fans. He's been simply very consistent the past 2 seasons. He's been available, and he's been consistent. Over the last 2 seasons, 111 receptions, 1,333 yards, 12 touchdowns. So the same amount of touchdowns as Christian Watson. Of course, he's played in more games, but way more receptions, more yards, averaged nearly 700 yards in terms of both seasons, but last season, including playoffs, had a 900-yard season. I mean, we saw what he did against the Cowboys in that playoff game. I mean, Romeo Doubs, there's some games where it's like, wow, this guy is a number 1 wide receiver. Now, it's not every game, because he has other games where he just puts up, a catch or 2 catches for 22 yards or something like that. But then you see the Dallas game and you're like, wow, this guy has a lot of talent. And the thing about Romeo Doubs and why I'm giving him an A tier ranking here is, like I said, consistency. He's been super consistent and put up the stats to show it. And I think he's just going to be a super, super solid number 2 wide receiver for the Packers for years to come, but we'll show flashes of that guy we saw against the Cowboys. Then in the fourth round, the Packers hit another home run pick, and this one is far and obvious. It's going to be my only S tier ranked player on this list today, so I'm just going to throw him up there, and that is Zack Tom. I don't give out S tier rankings a lot. It's usually like, hey, if this guy's, becoming a potential all-pro type of player, and we expect to see him in the green and gold starting for the next, 6-7 years, he's going to go up in that S tier, and that is Zack Tom. I think this is the best pick of that entire draft class, considering the round, considering what you're getting out of the player thus far through 2 seasons. He was the full-time starting right tackle in 2023. Over the last 2 seasons, he's allowed 49 pressures, but only 3 sacks. In 2022, he played snaps along the entire offensive line outside of center. He played some left tackle, left guard, right tackle. The guy is so versatile. He can quite literally play any spot, because he even played center at Wake Forest, so if you want to put him there, you can. There's the rumors of that this offseason, that the Packers see him as a Hall of Fame center. Maybe we see that in the training camp. He didn't practice during OTA, so we didn't really get a sign of that yet, but we'll see. But in terms of the last 2 seasons, we saw the potential year 1. Just didn't see too many starting snaps. But then last year, right into stardom, and was probably the best offensive lineman for the Packers in 2023. He had a 79.7 PFF grade last season, and Zack Tom, I think, is going to be a future multi-time All-Pro tackle for the Green Bay Packers, and even if they put him in guard, or even if they put him in a center, he will still be an all-pro, in my opinion, multi-time All-Pro for the Green Bay Packers. So for me, it's an easy one. This is an S-tier player for this 2022 draft class. Let me know if you agree down in the comments. Then in the 5th round, the Packers selected Kingsley Enagbare, and he's been a great depth rotational player for the Green Bay Packers. Hasn't been a full-time starter yet, and kind of had a down 2023, in my opinion, that of course ended in that knee injury that we all thought was an ACL. He had a much higher rookie season, in my opinion, so I was questioning putting him at B, but considering both of the B guys have been, rotational starters for the Packers and have started for the Packers in a lot of capacity, I think I'm going to put JJ Enagbare at C with Shawn Ryan, because there's potential, right? Like, we've seen rotation here and there, just like Shawn Ryan, and he's a great depth piece. He's had 52 pressures and 5 sacks over the last 2 seasons, so nothing crazy, right? Just 5 sacks. You'd like to see a little bit more to put him up into this B tier here. He's had 46 tackles and 37 total stops. I really like Enagbare. I think this Packers edge room has a lot of depth. They drafted Lucas Van Ness last year. They still have Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith. But right now, Enagbare is still kind of that 4th guy. Like, he's below the 3 guys ahead of him. So for that, I got to put him at C tier. Like I said, the rookie season was very promising, but 2023 wasn't that great, so I got to put him at C. Then the Packers made 4 picks in the 7th round in this draft, and the first one was Tariq Carpenter. I didn't like this pick coming out of this draft. It seemed like the Packers were too kind of obsessed with a tweener type of player, a safety / linebacker. We don't know what to list him as. We don't know where to play him, and spoiler alert, he didn't play either. So he's an F tier player for me. He saw 17 snaps for the Green Bay Packers, and yeah, it's a 7th round pick. Like, these guys don't shape out a lot of the time, so a lot of the time 7th round picks will end up being F or D tier players. But Tariq Carpenter is the F tier player on this list. I mean, 17 snaps, didn't know where to put him. Some snaps at linebacker, some snaps at safety. Even on special teams wasn't the best. Like, he definitely made some mistakes on special teams. So for me, it's an F-tier player. Already off the team. I believe he was on the Steelers last year. I don't even know if he's on a roster right now. But in terms of the Packers in the last 2 seasons, F-tier for Tariq Carpenter. Then we have Jonathan Ford, a defensive tackle they selected in the 7th round. He's still on the roster. He's still fighting for a potential 53-man roster spot. But every year, he's been kind of relegated to the practice squad, but he stayed on the practice squad. I don't know if he's been called up some games. I know he has no snaps in the regular season or postseason, so he might have been called up and active a game or 2, but he's seen no snaps. So I can't give him F just because he's remained on the roster, but I can't give him C because, you know, he's not on the same level as a Shawn Ryan or a JJ Enagbare at all. Like, these guys actually see snaps, they actually make plays, and they have stats. Jonathan Ford does not. So I think he fits perfectly in between Tariq Carpenter and Shawn Ryan and JJ Enagbare right here in this D tier. Then we have Rasheed Walker, probably the steal of the draft for this 2022 draft class, and I'm going to put him at B tier. I was questioning A tier, but we just saw just 1 season of this, whereas Quay, Walker, Romeo, Doubs, 2 consistent seasons. That's why I have them in the A tier list. But Rasheed Walker, you know, just came into stardom last season after seeing no snaps in 2022, thrown right into starting left tackle last season after Bakhtiari went down, and I thought he had a good season. A lot of people underrate Rasheed Walker, say, oh, he wasn't good at all, or the Packers need to have someone else there. In terms of pass blocking efficiency, I believe Trent Williams was the only left tackle above him last season. So he pass blocked well. He allowed 36 pressures and 6 sacks last season, so he did allow some sacks there, so that's why I can't put him in A as well. It wasn't like, oh, yeah, sure, it's 1 season, but holy, he had a really great season. Kind of like a Zack Tom. You know, Zack Tom obviously played snaps in 2022 where Rasheed Walker didn't. But Walker last season, a 66.3 PFF grade, so above average, and I think he's building off of that. Did also have 10 penalties, so that's definitely a problem he's going to clean up, but he's still starting left tackle right now through what we've seen so far this offseason, and maybe there'll be some competition there with Jordan Morgan in training camp, but I still think it's going to be Rasheed Walker week 1 at left tackle, and that's great for a 7th round pick. You know, I don't know how he fell to the 7th round out of Penn State when the draft was ongoing. It was still crazy to me that happened, but he's been good so far at left tackle the 1 season we saw. So for me, he fits right into B tier here. Then for the final player, it's Samori Toure, and this one hurts, but he's got to join Jonathan Ford at D tier. And this one hurts for me because I was so high on Samori Toure. You know, coming out of Nebraska, I watched his tape. This guy, in my opinion, was a excellent route runner, and I thought it would, you know, transition to the NFL, and this guy would be one of those receivers that come into the Packers as a 7th round or late round guy and start getting some snaps, and you're like, wow, how'd they get this guy in the 7th round? None of that happened. He's a good depth piece, an okay special teamer. I think he's returned some punts. I don't think he's done too well at that either. Over his 2-year career so far, he's had 13 receptions, 160 yards, and a touchdown. So he's had a little bit of a flash, you know, so it's kind of hard at the same time to put him on the same tier as John Ford because John Ford hasn't played at all, where Toure had, I believe, that nice touchdown catch against Buffalo a couple years ago. So I was really like kind of questioning to put him up here with Ryan and Enagbare. But at the same time, both of these guys have seen consistent snaps, at least as a depth guy, rotational guy, where Toure, you know, has a lot of games where he's not active, or last season where he's mainly on the practice squad. And this is looking at both years collectively. So I can't just look at 2022. I also have to add into 2023, you know, 160 yards, a touchdown. But at this point, Bo Melton, Malik Heath have really taken his spot as either wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6 and special team snaps. So he might not even be on the roster in a month. So for that reason, I do have to put him at D tier list, even though it pains me to say so. So that is my tier ranking list for the Green Bay Packers 2022 draft class. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Which players that I ranked do you agree with? Do you think some players should be at a different spot? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I appreciate you guys coming by to this video. If you want to see another tier ranking list on anything, it doesn't have to be just a draft class, maybe all-time, Packers wide receivers, something of that sort. Also, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. But I appreciate you guys coming by to the channel. I'll catch you all in the next one. And as always, go Pack, go.